Yeah.
Yeah, this section is called, it's kind of a weird word.
Opening
They're just
meditation,
calling it catechism, the
catechism.
discipleship catechism.
Right.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, the famous question that Jesus asked Peter and the disciples,
And he answered it.
who do you say that I am? Poor Peter did answer it several times, but Peter got wrong.
He was right this time.
Well, here we go. So, what our authors are trying to tell us in this one is discipleship is not about a theological orthodoxy, but about the way of the cross. But the cross did mean something different back then than it does to us now. Obviously, Jesus is our symbol that goes with the cross.
Well,
But-
it was an aha moment for me.
Yeah, kind of.
I had this moment where I'm like, oh, I'm always thinking of the crosses after Jesus. And
Right.
I'm thinking, wait, Jesus is talking about
If
the cross.
Jesus said it, he
So-
didn't say it in that term. I mean, I
He
don't think
didn't.
maybe he knew how they were going to kill him, but
He
That-
mentioned it at one point, I think, ahead of time.
he did.
Well, yeah.
Oh,
here.
you mean crucified? That he
Yeah.
was going to be crucified?
Well,
Yeah, I think he
right.
did too. But what our authors are saying is that this term was used more in the general sense of suffering, a person suffering. So these are the famous first lines that we've got. I mean, I don't know how many sermons we've heard or said. Are they countless? This is something our church does pretty well, I think. Whoever would save her life, I liked how our
Yeah,
author
they
said
did.
her, and whoever would save her own life basically will lose it, and whoever loses her life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. So that's a good one.
Yeah.
Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. Oh, I said song instead of son. There you go. For the Son of Man, which our authors like to use the translation human one, came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Hi, Jeremy. Jeremy joined us.
Hey, Jeremy.
All right. Because all the other teachers do maps,
Didn't want to feel left out, Jen?
look at this. School of the Road, the Gentile tour. So we've got him talking in, how do you pronounce that? Caesarea Philippi, Caesarea. So Caesarea Philippi, and then Galilee. This is kind of the closest I could get to what the area that he was in. We remember Tyre.
Right.
All these are starting to sound familiar to us.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a cool little map. All right, so here's the counter narrative. In our previous section, all of our lessons were about, you guys are just blind. You're not listening. You're not seeing what I'm trying to tell you. So this section actually starts that counter narrative where, Jesus over and over and over again heals the blind and heals the sick. So I'm glad that we have medical people here today. I was going to ask Jeremy and Paul. This is Mark 9, 14 through 29. And this description is pretty explicit. But this little boy, he's shaking. What are the different words that were used? He foams at the mouth, he grinds his teeth, and then becomes rigid. Do you think this was epilepsy? That was what popped into my head. But
Sounds a lot
You're
like
reading
Yeah.
beyond the chapter, right?
Huh?
What?
Chapter 11? Am I right?
Did I read the wrong one?
I don't know. I read
Yeah,
this.
Mark. Oh, it might be me.
Okay.
I don't know.
So Jesus is saying, you faithless generation, because once again, they were asking the disciples just to cast out the demon, but this time Jesus was saying, no, you unbelievers. This time it's about prayer. And if you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes. The Father says, help me, I believe, help my unbelief. So he's trying. And that's when Jesus did rebuke the spirit, saying, come from him, come out of him, and never enter him again.
I think you're doing
You're in
from
12.
chapter 12. You did jump into 12.
Did I really?
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
No, I'll just keep going.
Chapter 11.
So do your 12.
Yeah, go ahead. Because he does talk about blind.
No,
in
actually,
chapter
actually,
11.
I just think I put the wrong number, 8.
Okay.
It should be 8.
8:20.
This is the chapter I read,
Okay.
Healing a Blind Man.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah. I think
that
I
was
just,
8:22.
yeah, I think that was 8,
Okay.
Mark 8, not Mark 9. So
Okay.
don't read
8:22.
my numbers, read my words.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I know I didn't do 12. So this is where Jesus is saying, hello. He took him by the hand, and he's basically healing this little boy. And once again, he's saying to the disciples, this kind of healing comes only through prayer. What do you guys think about that versus casting out? Is there a distinction in your mind about why Jesus said it at this time? I'm just kind of curious.
Well, I don't know. I mean, all of that still sounds very much like an epileptic attack, because after a seizure, people go into what they call a postictal state, which is
Kind of like that frozen.
yeah, kind of frozen,
Yeah.
and lethargic, and that takes a while to get over.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Oh, I am with migraines, things like this.
Yeah.
Here,
I would say I
Catatonic.
didn't have migraines, but I used to have really bad headaches, and after I finally be released from it, I
Yeah.
would just be
You're kind of
exhausted.
you're kind of washed out.
So here's all the different times we see Jesus healing the deaf and the dumb man, the blind man,
Let's go mute. I don't say dumb anymore.
dumb. No, I like dumb though. That's interesting. I think there's a double entendre with the word dumb also.
Yeah, I get it, yeah.
Heals a blind man. So we know a lot of these stories. It's just kind of interesting. They're all kind of packed together, I think Jesus did feel like he had to repeat himself a lot.
Well, was he repeating himself to the same people? I mean, the disciples are always there, but were there
Yeah.
other people.
Yeah, he was traveling
was he-
around.
I
He was
mean-
traveling around.
Appointees I know have like multiple sermons that they use at different places
That's
repeatedly
true.
because
That's true. That's a
each
good
group
point.
needs to hear it.
Well, and it does seem like he continues to try to teach his disciples too,
Well, I'm
because,
sure, 'cause,
poor Peter, poor Peter.
I don't think Peter was.
I know. Well,
Like-
Peter gets a bad rap for a couple of things. Well, he did end up, kind of starting the church, so that's a good thing. But
Yeah, that's all the- yeah.
but he denied him 3 times. He kind of had to learn how to be a good follower of Jesus. And what I thought was interesting is that our authors are saying, that Peter's viewpoint of who Jesus should be was what the first century Jews thought he should be. You're the Messiah. And so this is that myth of they called it redemptive violence. The hero prevails over the enemy through their righteous force. That's Old Testament. That's just boom. That's exactly what Old Testament was. You're coming to save us.
My Bible actually did not have Messiah in there, so when I read because I read the Bible part first, like they tell you, and then my chapter, and I'm like,
What does your Bible
I
say?
just said Christ,
Oh,
which I think changes
what version is that?
a whole lot of
Oh,
what the
yeah.
chapter people are talking about. This is the new inspired version, international version.
Wow.
So I
Hello.
just,
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I'm Jane.
No pun intended. We're Art and Peggy and Karen May.
Nice to meet you.
Thank
Nice to meet you. We are reading this book called Say to This Mountain. We're studying Mark. And we're studying these 4 authors. They kind of look at Mark from a peace and justice standpoint. So that's where we're going with this. This is our chapter about healing the blind. Jesus, I was just saying that Jesus kind of, he was traveling around among the Gentiles, and he was healing the blind and healing the deaf. And he seemed to have to repeat himself a lot because his own disciples seem to always need to learn the lesson. That's kind of what we were just talking about. But on the other hand, like Nadine said, he was a traveling minister, so he was saying the same testimony, same sermon, because they hadn't heard it before. So that's where we're at. So now we're to Peter, and Peter says, when Jesus asked him, who do you say that I am? Well, you're the Messiah. And unfortunately for Peter, Jesus kept rebuking him and told him to be silent. And our authors were likening this back to remember how the demons who were in the bodies of the sick, they always recognized Christ first, and so he would be telling the demons, be silent. So a couple of times Jesus says to Peter, get back, Satan, and, kind of cruel. Yeah? Is there a reason why you guys see him doing that? Why is he treating Peter this way? I don't know if he's singling him out or this is just how Jesus talked.
I just thought, I think he's preparing him. This is the person that's going to take his ministry after he's gone. So he has to be very, very direct.
Maybe he's
you don't
harder on
want
him.
The future of the church to go in the wrong
All right,
direction.
I think that's a fair interpretation.
Not.
So that's because the very next section we've got him. He's starting to talk to his disciples about who he is. Now we've have a lot of different versions of the Bible that we've read through, and this group, they focus on, somebody tell me what's the version of the Bible that they like?
Common English.
Common English Bible. So
But even in that one, it said he was the Christ.
the Christ instead of the Messiah.
Yeah.
All
Which
right,
one has
okay.
the other?
It's been interesting to read all the different versions because Son of Man is what is kind of the language that we've heard a lot. But this other version actually says the translation is the human one. So it's kind of interesting to hear our authors talking about, because Son of Man always has that connotation of it's also Son of God.
Yes.
But then we've got the human one. So this talks more about the humanness of Christ. And so he's teaching his disciples that he's going to undergo great suffering, and he's going to be rejected, and he's going to be killed and then rise again after 3 days. So this is where he is starting that explanation, like you said. And we were talking about that Christ, when he said, take up the cross, he meant it in a very first century Jewish sense, because the cross to those people meant that there's going to be a lot of personal suffering, and so that's kind of what he was saying to his disciples when he said, take up the cross. So it's kind of just a little bit of a twist, because we always think of take up the cross in Jesus's, viewpoint, because that was what he did. But he was saying it in terms of their everyday lives too. So this is where our authors are saying that, are we missing the point? Are we more like Peter, where we try to kind of put words into, what is this?
Let me ask something about that.
Okay.
So the way that people were put to death, according to the Mosaic law, was by stoning.
Yeah.
Crucifixion was a Roman form of execution.
That's
and
right.
Usually was reserved for political
That's
people
right.
who had incited political insurrections or something like
Yeah.
that. So why did Jesus say, take up your cross, rather than pick up your stones or something like that?
Do you have an answer? Is this
I
rhetorical?
don't have an answer.
I haven't.
I'm just sitting here pondering.
I have an
the
answer. Does
problem.
anybody else want to answer before I answer?
Nope, because I don't know either.
I mean, the cross is a nice symbol,
Yeah.
because, obviously
The
this is
burden that you need.
for Mark,
Yes.
who's writing this
Yes.
well after the death of Jesus,
Yes.
is probably thinking of Jesus carrying the cross, on his shoulder to Golgotha. Pick up and carry your cross.
Here is what I think what our authors would say.
All right.
I'm kind of reading Mark now through their eyes. I think what they would say is that Jesus was actually making a political statement, because the normal way of saying is take up your sword against those oppressors, because the Roman, war, that's what the Messiah meant to these people. He's going to come and save them from their oppressors. But Jesus is actually saying the opposite. He is not calling them to war. He is saying to them, take up your cross. You have to be the one that suffers, and I'm going to show you how much I'm going to suffer that's how much you might have to suffer. And so I've always struggled with, you look at the Christian history and there's a lot of martyrs in Christian history. And I think it's partly because of this, it's better to sacrifice yourself to be that martyr like Jesus was than to, take up your sword, because we end up saying, okay, is there such a thing as a holy war? Is there such a thing as a just war? And we can debate that topic
Now you're
for
bringing another thought into
years.
my mind.
Okay, go ahead.
So in one of the verses, I don't think it's the one in Mark, it may be Matthew, but in one of the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter picks up a sword or takes out a sword and cuts the ear off of one of the guards. And Jesus tells Peter, put down your sword, because if you live by the sword, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. So those who live by violence.
That's kind of the same message, isn't it? And once again, it's Peter, isn't it?
But I like the contrast
Peter.
there of living by the sword.
Yes,
And dying by the sword, or you can live by the cross and perhaps die by the cross.
yes.
Which a couple of them did.
Yeah, and
Yes,
I was gonna say.
Peter did.
When they were talking about holy war and just war, I was thinking about the presentation of nonviolence that they did, and they added, so there were.
You mean
they
at
were
World
saying there was-
Conference?
uh-huh. They were saying there were actually 4, the holy war.
Yes,
the
I
just
remember you
war,
talking
the
about that.
just peace,
Mhm.
which says you have a duty to protect.
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
then pacifism, which one of the guys who had been in the military did not like the word pacifism because it made it sound like they were just sitting
right,
and doing nothing
right.
instead of, actively participating in pursuing peace.
Yeah, it's a really difficult topic, I mean,
Yeah, and they said it was nuanced. It was not like 1,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, that
Right.
it was a more nuanced.
yeah, sometimes we
Concept.
go to war because we have to, that's maybe that just, to keep the
That's
peace
exactly.
sort of thing. And I always think of World War II, if there ever was a
Yeah.
just war, nobody wanted Hitler to continue his expansion. I mean, that to me was a good reason to say, no, stop,
Yeah.
and it took a lot of people to do that. But what Jesus is actually trying to do with these first century Jewish people is he's flipping the script on them. The Messiah that they're looking for is this, ruler that's going to come in and help them win against their oppressors. And he's replacing it with this prophetic script. We've talked about this Jubilee issue that, that the Jubilee was all about, and the Jewish people should have been following the laws of Jubilee, where, what is it, every 7 years, it kind of balanced the books, is how I would look at it. The rich are given enough to the poor, that the poor are now,
They're excused from their deaths.
yes, and their Sunday worship and things like that. Everything kind of flips. Saturday, sorry.
Actually, Friday night.
Yeah. But the Jewish people had forgotten the purpose of Jubilee.
They're supposed to be
It's
given back what they had lost.
Right. So this is him once again flipping the script on them and now calling it this prophetic script. And I went back to Daniel a little bit early because he kept mentioning it. So I went back to Daniel to read that whole story. Daniel is prophesying about Jesus according to Mark. Mark is clearly taking the prophecy of Daniel and applying it to Jesus. So I went back and my version of the Bible said, I saw one like a human being coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given domination and glory and kingship. This is where people get confused. That all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away. And his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. So you can definitely see how Peter got the wrong idea. This is the prophet coming to save them. And this looks to me like it's going to be dominion and, power. But when Mark then looks at it, what he's saying is, I kind of said all this already. Sorry about that. I get ahead of myself a lot. I like how Jesus said that the enemy is violence itself. Wasn't that interesting?
Well,
So-
that's what the author
That's
said.
what Martin Luther, Martin Luther
Yeah.
King tried
Yeah.
to,
Yeah, our authors are saying that Jesus said that. He
Right.
didn't actually say those words, but
Against
I
this
liked that.
It is the human one's strategy of nonviolence, which understands that the enemy is violence itself. So it's not the enemy on the other side of the
Yeah,
line, it's the fighting with them.
yeah. So Jesus is saying what it means to deny themselves and take up the cross means that you're willing to lose your life for the sake of Jesus and the gospel. And that's how you will save it. So this is reclaiming the vision of the Jubilee, and this is claiming this, take up your cross, which means a symbol for personal anguish. So he says this a lot. If you want to become my followers, then let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. He's saying to Peter again, do not be ashamed of me or deny me. So that might have been a little bit clairvoyant in terms of what Peter was going to do. Unfortunately, Peter had to go through the hard lessons.
It's in fact that Mark didn't know that before.
Yeah, that's true. Well,
What'd you say, Nadine?
I said, if Mark didn't know that already.
Yeah.
Kinda.
did you notice that our authors were kind of rebuking both the conservative and the liberal viewpoint of who Jesus was? So the conservative viewpoint is Jesus was clairvoyant and, he saw his own death and he saw that Peter was going to deny him. The liberal side, if you want to be that specific, is, well, Mark did write this book in the year 80 AD, so he kind of already knew the story. So, but I think what the authors are trying to say is that Jesus was saying it to get people ready. It's kind of like you said, to get people ready for life without him, to get people ready to understand what take up the cross means to him, what denying yourself means to him, instead of kind of the usual viewpoint of who a Messiah is.
I will say, I read the meditation and I liked what it said about denying yourself, what to her it meant.
What did you like?
Basically that denying yourself doesn't mean that you live an ascetic life.
Right.
And that you aren't actually denying yourself, except that, and somewhere in here it did say that loving yourself did not mean putting yourself at the center of the universe.
Yeah, I definitely have a screen on that. There's a difference between, being selfish and taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
So this is self-preservation. He is basically saying that for what will it profit to gain the whole world and forfeit your life? So being ashamed of him, denying him is that shame that he was talking about, that he would be ashamed of a group of people that would do that. So, please don't do this because then I'm going to be ashamed when I come into the glory. So I thought that was pretty blunt. So here we are back at Daniel again. So Daniel goes through quite a bit of prophecy here, talking about there's going to be this courtroom scene, and it's going to be the Ancient of Days judges who judge the beasts. I consider that judge the powerful ones, and hands over true authority to the saints. And this judgment is rendered on behalf of a human one. In Daniel, it is a man, and then in the language, who makes an entrance on the clouds of heaven. Now here's how Mark says it. I am, and you will see the Son of Man, which also is human one, seated at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven. But then he talks about what it means to have apocalyptic faith. Daniel was telling all the persecuted Jews, don't worry, there's a higher court of true justice for you. But Mark is taking this courtroom idea and saying that it's two different courtrooms. To be acquitted before the powers, the powerful one on earth, is to shame the human one's court. So it's kind of like if you're acquitted down on earth, then you might be convicted in heaven, and vice versa. So it's this apocalyptic faith to see that Jesus's nonviolent power is the one that's going to rule, that's going to dominate. So he really is trying to say to them, this is where the martyrdom comes up, because he's saying to them, don't worry if you're convicted in your human courtrooms, as long as you stay true to me. And Peter did, and Paul did, and there were a lot of people over the years. I mean, you think of the sheer numbers of martyrs, and I hear people talk about martyrdom now as it is this wonderful thing. I mean, I think we can take it too far, obviously. I mean, but it is coming from this standpoint of how far will you go to test your faith? That's kind of what the point is here. So, what does take up the cross mean to us today? And this is what, Coral, you were talking about. It doesn't mean take up the cross, you have to bear the cross. You know how you've heard that a lot,
Yeah.
And to women who are in abusive relationships with husbands, over the years, at least in America, it has been, well, she's bearing that cross and she's staying silent like she's supposed to, and blah, 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 all the stuff that our society taught us. And these authors are saying, no, that's not what we're talking about. So they gave the story of a homeless woman who had been told that language all of her life. And she had been denying herself and trying to become what others expected her to become. And it led her down this path of addiction and path of loneliness, and she ended up homeless. And so what our authors are saying is what take up the cross means to her is to find life, to heal, and to restore wholeness. And they even went so far to say, this woman needs to say no to conventional Christian wisdom of denying yourself. So this is where we get into, a lot of us kind of grew up in a faith where, it's a sin to be selfish, It should always be about God and about others. Love your neighbor as yourself. And I remember when I was in my early 20s, I went to a seminar. Harry Black, if you guys remember him, Harry Black said to us, what about the other end of that? You love your neighbor as yourself. And so he flipped the switch on me to say, oh, God is also saying, love yourself.
I know.
We forget that part.
Yeah, it seems like that even in the church was overlooked.
We were, yeah.
And it has caused me, I will say, a bunch of trouble.
Yeah. Well, there's this guilt that comes up. There's this always striving, to love others. And then you're not, it's easier, quite frankly, it's easier to love others than yourself sometimes, But
and even in a situation like I've just come out of, where Lee was in the hospital for so long and then in rehab, I'm spending all my spare time that I can with him. And, people are always reminding you, you've got to take care of yourself in order to take care of him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
sometimes that's harder to do than others.
It is.
Well, and I
Depending on
will
the
say,
circumstances.
in yoga, they told us you have to fill your cup first before
Right.
you can fill somebody else's cup.
Right.
Yeah.
I heard
It's like
that. I
on the
heard
airplane.
that
On the airplane, put your mask on first.
Before you put it
went
on
to
your
that
child.
seminar.
Lifeguards,
Because what happens?
a lifeguard can't save anybody if they can't save themselves. You've got to think about all those things. And in a practical world, it works. But there is some kind of subliminal message that we've had over the years, that it's a sin to love yourself when you should be loving others more, mean, so I like how our authors
Well,
are flipping the
it's a sin
switch.
to love yourself if you're not also loving others. I mean,
Yeah.
Harry Black said, love others as yourself.
Right, that's
You
true.
gotta do both.
You got to do both. I agree. And that's really, I think that a lot of times people kind of assume that we're in a very, selfish society. And I said those pesky male theologians, they did have, that's me, that's my language. Because, in the early years, look at what this Swedish theologian said, and he lived up until 1978. Christianity does not recognize self-love as a legitimate form of love. Christian love moves in two directions, toward God and toward the neighbor. And in self-love, it finds its chief adversary. That was a message all the way up to 1978. So they are assuming self-love is selfishness, that we put ourselves above others. That's the assumption, I think, that the traditional Christian form of language. But
Well,
what
the other thing is from, the psychology part, is you can't love others unless you love yourself.
Mhm. And I
You
think,
don't know how to.
I do think that's the better statement, and that's a statement that churches, especially our church, is really pushing now. Love your neighbor as yourself. We are created to love every being, including ourselves.
Well, if you think about it, loving yourself without empathy for others, without loving others, is narcissism. Loving others without having empathy and degree of self-love is self-destruction.
Yeah,
So,
right. Both of them.
Jesus says, neither of those is right.
Balance.
What
Right.
you want to do is to have both.
Yeah,
Enough sense to take care of yourself so
Yeah.
that you can take care of others.
right. And I like how our authors are saying these are not opposing forces.
Yeah.
Like what you were saying, Paul, you can do both. And the balance is the most important thing, in terms of what love means. So it's a sin. It's actually I always have trouble with the word sin, obviously, but the word sin in this case is
Call it a mishap.
you're separating. Yes, mishap. You're separating yourself from God. That's what I think of sin. So both ways, just like what you just said, Paul. If you love others more than yourself, then that can be the sin of self-destruction. God wants us to love ourselves and take care of ourselves. And then the other flip of that is the narcissist, and unfortunately we live in an American society that's all about narcissism.
It's all about me.
It's all about individualism. It's all about how am I going to get ahead? How am I going to get rich? And so sometimes this message does get a little bit lost. We idolize the ones that have individual success, and it's hard for us as just these little people in Prairie Village, Kansas. It's like, what does it mean for us to have
Did
this
anybody
self-love?
ever successfully do it on their own?
That's
So,
true. Yeah, that's a good point. And most of
Take all
the
the credit.
humble ones will say that too,
You're standing on somebody.
Yeah.
My para's brother had all of his teeth pulled the other day. And she missed work that morning, and she, called in for the afternoon, but because she asked one of her brother's grandsons, who's a teenager, if he would come over and stay with granddad while she went back to work. And he came over and saw what she was dealing with, pulling gauze out of his mouth. It's bloody. He said he couldn't, but he says, well, what would you pay me to watch Grandpa? And that made her so angry. She says, get out of the house. Get out of my house. How much has he done for you? And here you turn around and ask, how much are you going to pay me to stay with you?
Yeah, it's a tricky lesson for, young people to learn, So, the gospel calls us out of life-centered and individualism. So that's really what that selfishness, loving yourself more, is all about, and self-interest, and into a life according to God's love. But radical love challenges oppressive power structures. That is the theme of this book. Jesus was constantly challenging that power structure. You know, he was constantly saying to them that it was all about denying self and doing it for God instead of, you know, pick up your cross kind of a thing, pick up your, sword kind of a thing. So I liked that the authors pointed out that Jesus was not calling us to be martyrs, you know, and I threw in this little quote because I always thought on Good Friday, one of the important quotes for me is when Jesus is on the cross saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? You know, the anguish that he had in that moment.
Or even he felt.
That even he felt it. That's
God
right.
felt
You know,
everything.
he felt betrayed by God in that moment. But then, of course, he knew that it was God. You know, he kind of submitted to God's will, and he said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." And so, that whole scenario of him on the cross is what I'm reminded of when I'm talking about how far he went to oppose, to challenge. You know, lots of
Well, he
people
was-
says that he could have run, he could have, you know.
In that moment, he was accepting his humanness.
Yeah. He was accepting the inevitable consequence of his choice to challenge that power. And that was difficult. That's the part that we have to look in our own lives. Because, you know, he's not calling us to die on the cross for him. He's not. But he is calling us to rebuild systems that are grounded in justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. I like that. That, you know, I love that we find books that go right along with the mission of our church, you know, because building peace and justice is a very important mission.
Kind of interesting that this lesson is landing on Juneteenth.
Yes, that's true too. So yeah, there's a lot of that. Where does Jesus call us to? I just have all these questions for us now. I wanted to kind of go through them and see what you guys thought. Where does Jesus call you to take up the cross and follow him? And what are your gifts to allow you to do that? I liked that the authors are being specific here. What are the gifts that you have? And then where in your life are you called to resist self-negation, the culture of violence, consumerism, or other forces of injustice? All of those are prevalent in our society right now. And then what are the possible consequences of your following this path? And what do you fear? So let's be realistic. You know, there was fear in Jesus. It's okay to say, I like the human part of Jesus. You know, the human part of Jesus meant that it was hard for him to, you know. God isn't saying to us it's going to be easy, just do what I do. You know, he's saying it's going to be hard. You are going to have to sacrifice yourself sometimes. So then I really like how it's the authors ask, do you have a community to help you? And I already think that we do, because we specifically have this community that we know will support us. You know, so I ask the question, what call do we have here at Mission Road to follow this path? You know, what kind of ideas do we have? I think that's it, yeah. What kind of ideas do we have in our own world, you know, in this congregation? You know, can we be that specific with each other? We don't have to answer it right now, but I kind of wanted to at least make you guys sit with it. Let's sit with this question a little bit.
It's really interesting that he has consumerism right up there with violence and other forces of injustice.
I thought so too.
Well, you look back through the whole process of making things, and there is places where it's injustice.
Yeah.
It's what
In
Job
the
said.
name of in the name of consumerism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have all these things. And what does it do to the environment? I went to talk, and this woman was talking about the amount of our clothing in the dumps, and it's just a ton
Yeah,
beyond everything else, percentage-wise.
yeah.
So, new fashion, what we're doing to our environment,
Well,
what we
and-
do to the people who are making those things.
Right, and the cheaper our clothes are, then it's more likely, well, probably all of them, quite frankly. I don't think it's just cheap clothes, but they are being created in sweatshops, so this is an American company that has decided to go for in the name of consumerism. I mean, this is what we all know in our heads. Yeah, in the name of profit, because they can't exploit, children and people with their hours. We've got wage laws here.
Well, they're trying to bring those down.
Trying to destroy
What
them.
does consumerism do for people?
They
I'm
consume
kind of
nothing.
putting all this together.
Put you in debt.
Well, it puts you in debt.
What does it do for
People
us a positive?
subconsciously see having more stuff as a safety net. We all try to build safety nets for ourselves so we don't ever have to get up on the trapeze without the comfort of that being there.
Isn't it? It's
And one
an
of the
addiction.
Temptations of Jesus
Safety,
was
yeah,
climb up to the tower and throw yourself off and the angels will catch you and you'll be fine. You have a safety net.
yeah,
And then you mentioned Jesus on the cross,
Yeah.
Father, why have you forsaken me?
yeah,
He suddenly realized that this is the reality of what he signed on for at the beginning when he was tempted in the wilderness. And now he has no safety net. He's given all of that up for the good of everybody else, for the good of us.
and he's giving us the message, even without a safety net, do this anyway. And that is scary. Consumerism is all about creating that safety
Yeah,
net, I
and so
agree.
that denying ourselves is, don't worry maybe so much about building your safety net all the time. That,
Yeah.
sure, there's nothing for all. I really believe that
Yeah.
in this world.
Yeah.
That's kind of one of
Yeah.
our principles of stewardship that was drilled into me as a kid. There's enough and for all. So
Yeah,
you can share the safety net so that we all have everything that we need, but nobody has maybe so much more than what they need that it's kind of gotten ridiculous.
I've really been thinking, and I don't know, Karen, if you looked up that group that you were talking about earlier that had the society where, it's kind of that communal type of society where one family would own a lawnmower, and so you would go and say, I'm going to use your lawnmower. Another family would own a washing machine, and people would go there. And I mean, I've really been thinking about that. I mean, you think about your own neighborhoods. Wouldn't it be kind of fascinating if a neighborhood all got together and decided to do that,
I think that kind of thing worked for a while, but even that story last week somebody had about the authors, maybe Dennis said it, that they all moved together for a while.
Oh, that's right. The authors tried
It ended
it.
up, they broke up and left. So,
It's
it
really
seems like
hard.
It can work for a while.
Yeah.
I'd like to see ones that work for,
So
A long
why did their group break up?
Yeah, I
I don't
never,
know. He said there was some
Doesn't say what.
inner fighting or disagreement over time that
Well, and
they
didn't
broke it
Joseph,
up.
I'm sorry, didn't Joseph Smith Jr. try that?
oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that was badly planned economically because all the poor people came in and there was nothing to share.
Well, and I, the story of Joseph Smith is that he kept asking those who had more money to keep giving more and more, and so they got resentful of that, and that's obviously a problem. I mean, that's kind of that.
It's happening today.
Exactly. If you look at our society today, it's you've got these people who say, people are freeloaders, we're giving them way too much. And then you've got on the other side, why can't we, share our wealth more? So it's just a continuing battle. That's what consumerism is, so.
I was without a hot water heater for 3 weeks. And when I took my first shower after I got my hot water back, it dawned on me how privileged I am. Because there's many people in the world that will never feel any kind of a shower other than the occasional rain. And, it really wasn't that big of a problem for me to take a cold shower. You just do it differently.
Yeah.
And
That's
it's
true.
nice that it was in the summertime,
Yeah.
because it's a whole lot better in the summer than it would be in the winter.
That's true.
But, it just really hit me, and it had never hit me before, that would be a privilege. And it really struck me,
Yeah.
you know.
I think this book is really, it's been good for our class because it's not meant to make us feel guilty about this privilege that we have. Because, I couldn't survive without my hot water. Let's be
3
blunt.
weeks was plenty.
I was going to say 3 weeks.
It's funny you mention that because everybody thinks, oh, cold shower, that sounds really terrible. But now people are paying to have these frozen bath things put in their homes so that
Right.
you can jump in the cold water because it's supposed to be healthy for you to stop your heart for a minute, I guess, while you
That's
That
true.
would.
take an ice water.
Well,
That's
I got to thinking, it really isn't all that much different than jumping into a swimming pool the
Yeah,
first time.
Exactly.
You just
Yeah.
shut the water off.
In the
between.
summertime, just sit outside in the 90-degree weather for a little while, and then you're like, oh, I love this cold shower. So we do have that here. But I do like that our authors are trying to say, I really like the challenge of how are we addressing the oppressiveness in our world, And, I feel every day, it's one of those things where you've got to say to yourself, okay, what can I do? Rather than just, kicking yourself all the time, And I do think it helps for us to talk about what we can do. Dennis is, it's near and dear to Dennis's heart, and it's something that we're kind of trying to figure out, what does peace and justice mean? And what can we as a congregation do for peace and justice? So we've been talking about getting a group of people to, like the Johnson County Museum has that exhibit about the Native Americans and how, they've been oppressed. And there's, if you look online, there are just so many museums and so many places to see the history of Kansas City, so that's something we want to do,
We were watching the news the other night, and Gwen Hawks was in
I
the
saw
background.
Oh,
And Paul goes, "Is that?" And I said, "Yeah, Gwen." And she was standing behind a spokesperson for a family that feels like an injustice is being done to their family, and it just, I could see Gwen doing that. And,
She's in the
it
forefront.
touches our
Yeah.
heart to know
Yeah.
that we know somebody like that, and they are a member of our
yeah,
broader family.
she's working hard to
but
be in that forefront.
She definitely, she is leading, is it called the Peace and Justice for the World Church?
I think it is.
And they have done things that have brought up conversations about racism and things
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
that are very, very interesting and thought-provoking. So it
Yeah.
just, but
She's
to
been
see
helping our
her,
mission center.
not just talking about it in here, but to see somebody out there actually in action.
I know.
I think that really was a striking moment for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Juneteenth is a good day to
It's
talk
tomorrow,
about that, So, just the fact that we as Americans, some of us I didn't know as a child what Juneteenth was. That was not a lesson in my regular class.
It was a small regional kind of.
Yeah,
thing
maybe
for a
down in
long
the
time.
South, in
It-
Texas. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of had.
But it's kind of fun
So-
for me that the awareness has really been good for all of us. It's about people's kind
I
of
think
joining together.
Kansas City is making it a holiday.
Oh,
I think the Kansas City workers are home tomorrow. It's becoming bigger.
There you go.
When I worked for Ecompex for a while, dealing with the archived papers of the American Indians, I learned so much, and it was so fascinating, and it made me want to know more about what the Indians went through, because it didn't take long to see what the whole thing was based on a lawsuit called the Cabell lawsuit. And the American Indians did not have access to their own money. Everything they earned was put away, and they had to go and request if they wanted to buy something. They had to go and get permission and get the money from somebody else. And the Cobell lawsuit was based on the mismanagement of their money by the American government. And it started out, they were asking for $40 million. They ended up, after 7.5, 8 years, settling for $4 million.
Wow.
But
Cabell, how do you spell that? Cabell.
Cobell, I believe.
Okay, I'll look that up.
And but it was just fascinating, and
Yeah.
it showed what they set up the one of the schools in the records, and it told how many yards of fabric they bought to make uniforms out of. It told how many pounds of this meat or that meat that they purchased to feed them. It told about ordering so many thousand pairs of shoes from the penitentiary here in Kansas for the children to wear. And and it was just fascinating, but you don't realize how much
I do love,
they went through.
I do love that we're educating ourselves now. I mean, to me, looking back at history truthfully is good for us. It's not meant to make us feel guilty. It's meant for us to look ourselves clearly. And I mean, we evolved. That's exactly what humans do. I mean, to me, we had slavery in our country. That's just a fact, and it's not an opinion. And so it's better for us to look at it clearly and to look how it changed society and how we have been kind of working on it ever since. I mean, there's lots and lots of stories about the 13th Amendment came around to free the slaves. And then it kind of flipped the switch on some of the lawmakers to say, well, okay, let's do this. Let's make loitering basically a crime that you have to go to jail. And so many of those blacks ended up right back in jail and ended up being slaves again. There
was an article on the internet this morning that I didn't get through all of it, but it was 3 myths about slavery. And the first one was talking about that slavery didn't end when it was made illegal, because in the South they didn't kill anybody.
That's Juneteenth.
And
exactly. That's why Juneteenth.
That's what the thing. And this one gal, she was a housekeeper and a cook for this family down there, and said that she would kind of hide around the chimney and kind of eavesdrop on the boss, the guy, and she actually heard him tell his wife that they had ended slavery, and this is a guy in the South. And she come running, when she heard that, she come running around the corner saying, I was free, you know? And she went out to the fields and told everybody, and they quit, But this article also says that, when they did find out they were free, a lot of them still had vigilantes that killed them, or went back and got them and took them back and still used them as slaves. And it's really interesting. I've got to read the rest of it. But,
it was not.
You don't think about some of that.
Well, I have a couple of adult friends who were raised in the South, and they still swear today that the Civil War was not about slavery, but states' rights.
States' rights,
To have slaves.
Exactly.
Well, they
was the
didn't,
state
but
right.
Exactly.
but
And that, I mean, it's literally written in multiple documents.
Right.
The state right that they were fighting for was
Slavery.
And
That part of it gets a little lost in their history books. Yeah.
Remember that book we read that talked about prisons
Yes.
and how essentially many of the prisons in the South are very, very similar to slavery.
And some of them, there's at least one that we read about that used to be of the plantation, and so the guy who owned the plantation, he just turned it into a prison. It's like, oh, okay, let's just do this instead,
so on the nose, isn't it?
Exactly. It's like, I mean, obviously here we are in 2023 still living with this, I mean, we have got to live with who we were in the past and who have we become now.
I know when I lived in California in the 1970s, the migrant workers were treated just like
Oh,
slaves,
yeah.
you know. Essentially, their income was nothing, and it all went into the store or whatever. And
Yeah.
they could-
That's right, that's right. They could only buy in their stores.
We
You
just
know.
did Grapes of Wrath.
I was gonna say,
for
Grapes of
our
Wrath
book.
talks about that.
Yeah,
I just
for the
reread
book
it.
club I belong to.
Yeah.
I just reread that, last year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're
I
doing
remember
banned
going to a
books.
You
Cheech
didn't
and Chong
get paid in
concert
dollars.
in 1972, and we were all about boycotting lettuce. Does that give me credit for peace and justice?
Sure. Sure,
It's a
Paul.
start.
Cheech and Chong.
Can I mark that?
But that is why they were boycotting lettuce.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, there's some good.
But you know, that penitentiary book, it was
What's
like,
the name of that book?
if they didn't have enough people to work the fields, they just went and arrested people
Right.
for no reason.
That's right. They just rounded them all up, you know? If they were just standing on the sidewalk,
Yep.
loitering,
Yep.
you know, go to jail
No,
because they needed more
Jim Crow
people.
laws were all meant to basically enslave people again.
Yep. Yeah.
What will
So,
they say
I read
about us,
another-
I think, in time. What will our grandchildren say about us?
I don't know. That's a good question. Are we better? We're
We're
getting better, aren't we? I mean, I keep thinking we're getting better, and then you know, unfortunately, you've got still all of the clashing, you know,
I
of
think when you get
Black
closer
lives
to doing something, the tension is so much stronger
Yeah,
until,
it's sort
and
of-
then something pops.
Yeah. yeah.
But I think we're getting closer. I mean, the tension seems a lot
Yeah.
stronger.
Well, what you mentioned earlier, there was an article about the child labor laws that they're trying to revoke, take back in.
Well, they're trying to
Allow kids
allow,
to
I
do-
think, younger kids to work because teenagers, the younger kids are willing to work, where older teenagers probably aren't wanting to work for the wages that they're offering. So,
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.